Good evening, everybody, and welcome to September 13th Pullman Police Advisory Committee. I am Stephanie Rink, the chair, and welcome. The first order of business is attendance, but I've already taken roll. Thank you very much. Second order of business is we are going to go through our new member application. Melissa, welcome to the Police Advisory Committee. If you would be so kind to step up to the podium, and just as a reminder to everybody, with our microphones, please speak directly into the microphone and make sure that you push the push button to turn on and back off. Melissa, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think I'm in the microphone. So as she mentioned, my name is Melissa Medali. I've been a member of the Pullman community going on 5 years now, and it's an honor to be here. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I ended up here in Pullman after living in Spokane for a year. My former partner opened up eye clinics here that I helped him run for years. And now that I know that this is truly home, I've always had this longing since we first moved here to be more involved in the community, but finally now I have the space and time to do so. And so I hope to join you in bringing the community together, as well as, kind of playing this middle person role in between the community and the police department here, and just really trying to bring mindfulness and presence to the community, an open mind. I'm going into situations without assumption and really being open to everything and anyone in the community has to say, and make sure that everyone's voices are heard. I have this desire to share my life experiences and what I feel like is a unique background. I lived in the world of communications and advertising for a very long time. And so relating, communicating, exchanging information with people is just my deal. And it would be awesome to share that with more folks and not just keep that in my tiny but growing circle. And also, I just started a grad school program in counseling psychology with an emphasis on community mental health. And I just feel like that especially would like to share the wealth of information that I've already learned from that and help bring our community to even more and more positive places. What else can I tell you about myself? I worked in the wellness space for a while. So I have a mindfulness practice and kind of this just, what I feel like is like a well-rounded take on the world that I would like to share with anyone. So that's a little bit about me. Does anyone have any questions?
All right, if there are no questions, Melissa, what we'll do is we'll have you step out in the hall and we will turn off recording. Oh,
I think
Rocky, did you have a question?
This was more of just a comment. I'm a clinical social worker, so I'm super excited that there's another future mental health professional in the area.
Oh, wonderful. I love it. Thank you for mentioning that.
So we'll have you step out in the hall and we will discuss and we will bring you back in.
Okay, should I bring things with me or?
Nope, they can just stay here if you want.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Melissa, we would like to welcome you as our newest member of our Police Advisory Committee. Thank you very much, and you may join us anywhere over by, do we have another chair? So we are going to go backwards on the agenda. For the first time ever, we're going to go backwards. And we're going to go back to B. And our next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the August 16th meeting. I assume everybody is well versed in the minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns of said minutes? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve? Second? All right, all in favor? Any opposed? Great. We will move on. We have a new order of business. We are going to invite Megan up to our podium to talk about the survey. Thank you, Megan, for being here today.
By the way, we can follow city council rules, and when you're presenting, you can take your mask off.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so I was just going to give a brief update regarding the community police contact survey that's kind of been in the works. Currently, right now, we are working with the DGSS at WSU, who will be helping administer and collect data for the survey, so they'll be playing that role. And if I am heading the subcommittee that will be working on the community survey, then my role is to really hopefully involve everyone's voices, the community's voice in what we include in that survey, just to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page, and if there's anything specific that the community would want represented in that survey, that it does end up in the questions that we ask. So currently, we do have a draft of the survey that I'd be happy to share out to the subcommittee. I can do that via email. However, we want to work through that. And yeah, if there's any questions right now or in the meantime, I can share my email out to everyone if you want to contact me that way.
If you could just brief us a little bit on what is going to be asked a little bit before we see everything, if you can talk about that and how you've come up with some of the questions.
Asked on the survey itself?
Yes.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're leaning more towards the police contact survey as opposed to a community survey. So this survey is really going to be aimed at really understanding the context of the interaction. So what the individuals who are being served by the police are feeling towards that interaction. So there's a lot of, there will be a lot of procedural justice type measures. So understanding how the individuals perceive they're being treated in that interaction. So I would say that's probably the main component. But other than that, I think we can discuss further as a group, and if there's additional questions or areas that we want to kind of tackle with the questions as well.
Perfect.
The, on police contact, can you define who that individual is? Does that include bystanders or?
So that's one of the pieces of the methodology that we're currently working through, is understanding who exactly we're going to be able to contact, and that'll kind of depend on how we decide to administer the survey as well. So whether it's going to be through the mail or if we can find a different mode of kind of administering it. Yeah, primarily the individual directly in contact with the police, just because that'll be probably the most realistic way to contact them to get them to do the survey. Yeah.
So Megan, can you speak to the benefits of surveying both the officer and the community member they're interacting with?
Yeah, so that is something that I found kind of in reviewing the research related to these types of surveys, that doing a survey for the officers themselves as well to get their perspective on the interaction, because then we can kind of look at the congruence between those two, whether the officer feels like it was a positive interaction and whether the citizen felt like it was a positive interaction as well.
Are there any other questions or comments?
What's the timeline that we have for the survey?
Yeah, that's a good question. Does anyone, Chief Jenkins, is that a you question? It's a David question.
So I think we can move as fast as really the police department or the committee we would want. We have a draft of the survey, so I think since we have several new members, it might be important to send the email requesting subcommittee participants so that we could convene that. Megan has agreed to chair that subcommittee. Once we have a working draft, and then we can move that pretty quickly to a final version, publish that. I think I'd like to give it at least a few weeks so that it's published, that everyone in the community, I think Darby's been really great about social media, even putting that out there and really asking the community to voice any particular concerns. And I think after we get the estimate to the chief, and then the chief moves it through the process, we could be collecting data easily by January. And I know I say that easily by January, it's several months away, but we still have to get the approval for the funds. We have to then move this through, get it into committee, get it approved, get it out for community input, and then figure out really what the solution to get officers to complete the survey, get this to community members. And I think what's unique about at least what I've seen been doing, so I'm relatively hands-off in this process because we want to avoid a conflict of interest, is that we'll have the community member, the officer, and we'll have the body-worn camera video. So we can really triangulate across all of these to understand if there's congruence, if the officer says, I did these 5 things and I did them really well, and the community member says, hey, they didn't do any of these things, or they did, we also have that body-worn camera footage to be able to go objectively, the officer did all 5 of these things, and I'm just making that up, right? This idea of 5, whatever number, I think that's an important way to think about these data. So it lets us objectively map these out. And we've done this for a prior study with the Traffic Safety Commission. So I'm really excited about that. But I think once we figure that out, I really think we could be collecting data by January.
And so then how long do you think the data process or collection process is going to take? 6 months? Or is there a threshold on responses that you're looking for?
So right now, do you want to speak to that? Or do you want me to?
You can. I would just say DGSS is helping with that part of it for sure.
One of the things that we're recommending is that if it's not expensive to do, we would really like to start baseline, like essentially having a quarterly. So we would do this each quarter so that we just don't have a 1-year snapshot. That's not helpful for anyone, right? And if we can figure out a way to get, really kind of quarterly collection, then we would really, moving forward, we would always have that. We would know we would have 4 data collection efforts and they'd be ongoing. One of the things that we've proposed to the chief is that we have at least collection for 3 years. Because again, if we just do a one-time snapshot, that's not helpful, right? We really want to know if there's problems, where are they at? And if we don't have any, it'd be great to be able to be responsive to the community to say, we've got 3 years worth of baselining data. Officers and community members really do agree on the quality of these interactions. The hardest part that the subcommittee has to be mindful of is that we have the objective items, that's did they happen or not. But part of the instrument is also getting at the quality question. Just because the officer how did you feel about that interaction? And so a big part of this is from the research side is trying to understand how people perceive interactions. It might be that officer was really procedurally just. They did all the things. They introduced themselves. They used their name. They asked the person for their name. They used their name. They told them the reason for the stop. They explained the reason for the stop. They gave them an active voice, and yet they might very well think that there's something wrong. We need to be able to identify that. And so that's part of why the subcommittee, I would argue, will take at least a month to come to a consensus around those questions.
Yeah, and it makes sense that it would be a continuous process regardless. So you have the baseline to work from and then see trends from there. So then it may be in the weeds, but out of my own curiosity, and maybe it's something that the subcommittee explores more, what is the aging process of the interactions? Are you trying to seek interactions that are relatively recent? Is there a limitation process that you're putting on the interaction so that you're not dipping into open investigations or things that are of public interest or kind of conflicts for the police process and due process? Or is there an aging process that maybe puts it out there so that things that are already closed cases and now you're doing a follow-up process with the survey? And is that aging of concern, I guess, to the survey responses too? If it's too much of a wide aging, so you have some responses that are relatively recent interactions, and so they have different feelings or responses or memories compared to some that maybe be 2 years old. I don't know what the responses are, but there'd be theoretically
No, it does.
a wide
right.
gap there, right?
No, very true. I think part of that is creating a sampling frame that's appropriate. And so that's one of the benefits of working with DGSS is that's what they do.
Okay.
They produce these surveys, they do these for communities pretty regularly. They did one recently for the Washington State Patrol. So they have a really robust sampling strategy to get at this, and so we'll be able to tap into their expertise and really their resources to be able to collect the best data that we can. But you're right, it's never going to be perfect. And then this, I will say that one of the unique things about this project is most often you do traffic stops, right? That's where a lot of this research is done. We're trying to move it to other types of contacts. So you really can see how well, officer or a community member feels a domestic disturbance, right? Or a trespassing or a loitering. So being able to break that out to those other contact types, is really an important first step. So we're not studying policing based only on traffic stop interactions. When, yes, that's, as you'll see the chief will talk about, that's a part of it, but there's a large part of their, interactions that we don't ever really look at. So, I think that's an excellent point, and it is one that we're very mindful of. But it'll be recent, so we'll always sample based on the last quarter is the idea. So this way, from a kind of a temporal recall, or it's really about in the last 3 or 4 months. We'll kind of figure out, narrow into what is the best point.
Is there something that the department for Pullman is looking specifically or as a focus area that's relevant to our communities in particular that you're hoping to get out of it, Chief? I mean, we have lots of student interactions. We have a college. We have more traffic. I don't know if we have more traffic than other types of interactions proportionally to other cities, but I mean, as a police department, is there a focus area that you're hoping to learn more about?
I wouldn't say anything specific. I think it really just gets down to, like Dr. Macon said, about the quality of our interactions. The vast majority of our interactions are non-enforcement interactions. So some of the issues that you had concerns about, there will be that as far as ongoing investigations, but that will be few and far between for the most part. Right now, we just don't have a really good gauge of the quality of those interactions other than complaints or the lack of complaints. And I don't think that's a very good gauge to use. So we definitely want to find out where we are and where we can make improvements.
I guess my last question would be, are wellness check type of interactions included? Because when you look at our police logs or our weekly, I forget what it's called, that Darby sends us, that's a huge portion of our interactions, I think. And so is that type of part of the categories included?
If that's what the advisory group would recommend, then we can sample from that group as well. I think this is one of the reasons that this came out of the summit as a recommendation, which I think is incredibly important because it came from community to say we would like this done. We now have the ability to do it. And so I think that what comes out of this group in the community on what questions we should ask, who we should ask them of, I think we all have to lend our voice to that. And I'll do so as my role in the PAC, not as a researcher, but I think the more voices that we have and perspectives from everyone here, I think we're going to produce a survey that I really do believe we can get other cities and departments to implement.
That's all I got.
Do you have a project timeline?
We could easily, yeah, we could, I mean, we have a
Yeah.
basic one. What holds us up is really
Is the-
just getting the sampling frame. So that's a great point on, do we want to include wellness checks? Because if the answer is, we have to figure out then what is the best mechanism of giving the survey and figuring out what are ways to actually increase response rates. So I think that once, I guess if Darby sends around, I guess for action items, if Darby can send around the request to the membership so that we can see who would like to be on the subcommittee, then Megan can start working on drafting, well, one, filtering around, or sending around the draft, start working on those questions, identifying the sample populations. So if we want to just do a wellness sample, and then all the other criminal complaint samples, we can do that. So we can start getting those sampling frames put together. We need those to be able to get to DGSS to give us an estimate. Because right now we are working on general calls for service data.
Yeah.
And there might be types of crimes that, or contexts that we just can't collect. There might be reasons why practically we just can't get those surveys to those folks. Like we don't have any contact information. We don't have an address. We don't have anything to go on. Can't get them a survey. So we can figure out that. Yeah, we can put together just a set of milestones.
Yeah, I would like to see that. And then, so I'm assuming once you create your subcommittee, you meet, you do the draft survey, then you'll present it back to us. And then we'll have a better timeline of when the survey will go out?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, a
think
big
that's
part
a-
of it is the
and-
survey and the sampling frame, because we need those, we need the sampling frame to get the budget. And then we have to get the budget to the chief.
Right.
Great.
And I currently have the background information and kind of sample surveys as well, if that would be helpful for me to reshare out before anything. I can do that too. Background of examples of other surveys that have been conducted, so if that's helpful.
That would be good. It might be really helpful once we start looking at your draft, so
Okay.
we can kind of have an idea of what we're looking for.
Yep.
So after you meet with the subcommittee.
Okay, sounds good.
Any other comments or questions? Great, thank you, Megan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Chief Jenkins, I will turn it over to you for our annual reports.
All right, well, I handed out both the 2019 and 2020 annual reports. 2019 is late because the time of the year that we start working on it, around March or so, and 2020 became a really busy time of year for us when COVID hit, and so it was put on hold, and so we just completed the annual reports for both years. So I'm going to go over just some of the highlights of the annual report, each annual report, and as we go through, if we are bypassing something that you want to hear about, speak up, and I will speak to that. So, well, the first thing I'll point out, we'll start with 2019, and on page 3, there's some paragraphs there talking about the National Crime Reporting System, which has been UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting, and has transitioned to National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. That became mandatory, I think it was this year. And there are still agencies working to transition to NIBRS. Pullman's been reporting NIBRS numbers for, I think, maybe 25, not that long, maybe 20 years. Washington State has in the 90% participation of law enforcement agencies in NIBRS, so we're well ahead of the rest of the nation on that. And the main difference is that NIBRS collects a lot more detailed information, where UCR was more of a hierarchical type of reporting. It would collect the most serious crime data, and then the rest of the crimes would not be reported, where NIBRS will report all of them. So you can't really compare the NIBRS with the UCR numbers because they're definitely apples and oranges. So when you're looking at the numbers, you definitely want to make sure which ones you're looking at. So page 4 shows our crime changes in comparison to the statewide crime changes. And you'll see that crimes against persons, Pullman was down over 20%, while state was up. Crimes against property was down 9%, state was up over 20%. Crimes against society offenses were both down, state and Pullman. And then total crimes, Pullman was down 12% and the state was up 17%. We'll talk for a minute about what those, well, you can see on the next page, on page 5, it breaks down those types of crime categories that NIBRS reports. So there's crimes against persons, crimes against property, and crimes against society. And so this reports the numbers back to 2009. You'll see that our person clearance rate in 2019 was 71%, which is the highest it's been since the reporting shows here. And our overall clearance rate was, let's see, 42%, which again was the highest clearance rate that we've seen since at least 2009.
Chief,
Yeah.
what is clearance rate?
So a clearance rate is a crime that is solved by either bringing someone to prosecution or identifying someone that could be prosecuted, but there's some reason that they weren't prosecuted. So it's essentially solving the crime, identifying a suspect, for the most part, generally speaking. What else do I want to say there? Oh, so our primary drivers on our crimes are larceny or theft and vandalism. You can see there that between the two of those, there's 400 and maybe 450 or so crimes total out of 931 total crimes. So those are really big drivers in our crime rates. So when our numbers go up or down, a lot of the times it's driven by those numbers. And then on page 6 are the charts and graphs that represent those crime numbers in both bar chart and then just a line graph. The line one breaks it out separately, so you can see those changes. So you can see that persons in society stay fairly level, and they're the least amount that are reported. And then again, the property, there's a lot of variance there, but we've had a general downward trend, even with a little bit of an increase there in 2015. Overall, we've had a downward trend since 2010. Page 7 just lists different types of activities and the volume of numbers, and you can see those numbers back to 2013. Our crime graph on the previous page generally mirrors our calls for service numbers. It's not an exact mirror, but generally speaking, when our calls for service are up, we're going to have higher crime numbers. And you can see there in 2015, that was the highest number in those years reported, and back to 2013, and that's also the highest point on the graph as well. Page 8 shows response times broken out into 4 different levels of urgency for calls. So the most urgent emergency call, or most urgent call, would be under an emergency that is shown in red. And you can see the description there, what types of calls those are for. We were trying to figure out what caused the huge spike in 2019, and it turned out it was the data collection. We had been applying certain filters in the response times. What happens in the response times that we get out of our CAD system, our computer-aided dispatch, is that there's a certain percentage that are anomalies. And for example, we'll show a medical emergency that took 10 hours to respond. Well, there was an issue with how that was documented in the CAD system, and obviously that didn't reflect what the actual response time was. So we have to eliminate a certain percentage of the calls at the top, at the bottom, to eliminate those anomalies. And we did that up through 2017, I believe, or actually 2018, And 2019, you can also see in the 2020 numbers, they're high, particularly 2019. So we're going back through now and reapplying those filters, and I'll be doing an updated report on the calls for service response times. So I'll skip over to page 11. We had a couple of retirements in 2019. And then we also hired a number of officers. Out of the 4 officers, you can see that were hired, 3 of them were females. So we've been getting a really good female applicants for law enforcement lately. And I'll also point out that in that table in the middle, under commissioned officer staffing and the officers per capita, I have the numbers 33 there for 2018 and 2019. Those are authorized positions, but those were not filled positions. And that's something else I'm going to go back through and come up with. It would be essentially an average number of officers we had working in a particular year. So it will relate more to the things that you're looking at here on the volume of calls and service to our population. Page 14, under the Quad Cities Drug Task Force. Because of our vacancies, this is a position that's held in detectives, and this is one position that we've held vacant just because we have vacancies in the department. And our first priority is to make sure that we have our patrol staff staffed properly, and then detectives after that. Page 15, there's a mention of some SWAT call-outs, and I'll just point out that these reflect a lot of patience and de-escalation, which is, I think, just to point out that this is not a new concept. This is something that we've practiced for a long time, and this kind of points that out, particularly on the SWAT call-out. Under page 16, the airport is required by FAA to have a law enforcement presence on outgoing flights, and they do not have their own police department, which some airports do. And so Pullman Police Department is essentially provides that law enforcement presence. We don't have to be there 100% of the time. We maintain this in 2019. We had about 72% coverage. Page 17 at the very bottom it mentions the research consortium that was developed, where Megan is the research fellow. And I believe I reported here that program won the Smart Cities Connect 2021 Smart 50 Award, which is given out annually to recognize 50 global smart cities projects honoring the most innovative and influential work. So that was an honor to get that award. Page 19 at the top explains the public safety camera internship and WSU that Dr. Macon started in collaboration with our camera program at Adams Mall. In the middle there, our drone program also won an award, Outstanding Achievement in Local Government Innovation Award. Page 20, we continually are expanding our outreach through social media, and there's numbers that Darby has provided there on that. Page 22, we purchased and implemented some new software that helps with our residential rental and commercial business registration. The city has ordinances requiring those who manage or own rental property to register them with the city, and same with commercial businesses. And so with we added a code enforcement officer, I believe it was in 2018. So we now have 4 code enforcement officers, and so this program used to be administered by the record staff. It's now been transferred to code enforcement, so they can help with the enforcement part of those programs. And they also work a lot with landlords with nuisance issues, and so this software is really helpful to them. Page 23, the Police Advisory Committee. Kind of an overview on that page, and the top of 24 about the Police Advisory Committee activities during the year. Under significant events on page 25 at the very bottom lists the death of the 19-year-old Washington State University student Sam Martinez from alcohol poisoning. So that's it for 2019. Any questions before we move to 2020? All right. So 2020, page 4, you can see again under the comparison of Pullman and the state on changes in crime. And again, we had a reduction in crimes against persons, and the state had an increase. Same with crimes against property, and then we both had crimes against society reductions. And then total crimes, we had a reduction, the state had an increase. And then here are the charts and graphs again, showing the continued downward trend. Page 5, a lot of the same information from the previous year. The person's clearance rate went up higher, so we were at 82%. Page 7, again, the response times, and as I mentioned, 2019 and 2020, we need to go back through and filter those and update those numbers. Page 8, under awards, the middle award, one of the life-saving awards, the third paragraph down talks about July 1st. This was a situation where there was a call of a person threatening to commit suicide, holding a shotgun to themselves. The officers established contact after a period of time and ultimately convinced him to put the shotgun down and get some help. Every year, the American Legion recognizes police and fire for life-saving efforts, and so these officers were recognized by the American Legion, and then the local American Legion turns that into the state organization for consideration of a state award, and the officers were awarded the state award for life-saving for this particular incident. Page 11, discussion of training. There was a huge impact to our training due to COVID-19. A lot of our training is typically held in person, and so we ended up with just over 2,100 hours of training. The previous year, we had almost 4,000 hours of training with all of our staff. So it took a while for training vendors to transition to doing some training online, which eventually happened. But we had a huge reduction in training. We were able to get some implicit bias training in. And also there's a new statewide training curriculum called Patrol Tactics, where part of that includes an emotional intelligence section. So we did that in 2020 as well. Page 12, again, because of vacancies, we did not have someone in the drug task force. We do have a detective meet with the task force at their monthly meetings, just to liaison with them, and they can always call on us if they need assistance from us, and then we also pass on any type of drug intelligence to them as well. Page 13, again, another SWAT call out where there were hours of negotiation and de-escalation that ended peacefully. Page 15 at the bottom of the page, we had 7 Narcan, or actually, we had 4 Narcan saves. Initially, we haven't been tracking the Narcan saves that well. We now have a better system in place. I suspect we may have had more than 4 that year, but that's how many we could actually confirm. Page 17, our drone program. We renewed our certificate of authorization that we get from the FAA to operate our drones in I think we have 5 or 6 counties that we're able to operate in, and also authorizes us to train our own pilots. Page 18, social media again. Page 19, under COVID-19 collaboration, on March 2nd of 2020, we hosted and called the first COVID partner meeting of the Pullman area. So the Department of Health, the school district, the county health, or emergency management, the hospital, Schweitzer. So this was one of the first of very many similar meetings that would ultimately happen throughout COVID. Page 19, again at the bottom, we mentioned the Reimagining Public Safety at Pullman Virtual Summit. That was held, actually put together as a result, or put together by the Police Advisory Committee. Page 22 at the top, Reserve Officer Dennis Pratt retired from being a reserve officer after 10 years of volunteering. He volunteered thousands of hours every year as a reserve officer, and he made quite a contribution to the police department and the community. We have a new reserve officer, Jeff Gordon, who went through the academy. The Reserve Academy graduated at the beginning of 2020, and he volunteered over 1,000 hours in 2020. Page 23, under significant events, there's some activities listed there that were in response to the George Floyd incident in Minnesota. There's also a mention of a big increase in unemployment fraud claims as a result of COVID-19. And also a fentanyl-related death of a WSU student. So that's the end of 2020. Does anybody have any questions?
No comments or questions?
I have a question. It looks like the numbers on.
Carol, can you speak into the microphone though?
Oh, sorry. It looks like the numbers on page 4 of both are exactly the same. Maybe you already mentioned that.
You know, as I was reading the second one, that's kind of hit me when they looked like they were the same. So I will have to check those. When I do my update on those other items, I'll update those as well.
Got it.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Chief, would you like to move forward with your police department update?
Sure. So staffing, we still have 4 vacancies. We had 2 officers in background from the most recent recruitment, and I've made what are called conditional job offers to both of them. And what that means is we've offered them the position pending the completion of some of the background that cannot be done until we make a conditional job offer. And that includes the psychological test, the medical test, hearing test, drug screen. I think that's it. So we have conditional job offers out. The next available academy, if we hired someone today, would be in January. And that one right now is in Spokane. So if we're able to finish the remaining tests on these two applicants and they're successful, then we should be able to get them in the January academy. We are going to hold another round of interviews on October 11th to try to fill the other two vacancies and have a list for any future vacancies or additions. Our property and evidence specialist is going to be retiring at the end of January. And so we're conducting an internal recruitment through September 17th. We're doing an internal recruitment because there are some record specialists who have an interest in that job. And so we think we have some really good applicants for that. In records, we currently have one vacancy, and if we do move one records specialist to evidence, property and evidence, then we'll have a second vacancy. So we did have interviews, and I have interviewed the top 3, and we started backgrounds on the first 2. The chief selection process, I think there were around 9 applications received. Some were eliminated or disqualified because they didn't meet the minimum requirements for the position. 4 were going to go through the process, and the morning of the first round of interviews, one of the applicants withdrew, so that left 3. So at the end there were 2 rounds of interviews. The first round of interviews, there were I think 4 or 5 panels, and those were done remotely. And all 3 applicants moved forward to the second round of interviews, which were done in person, and there were 4 panels that had different scenarios set up for each of those panels. And after collecting all of the information and the feedback, there was no real consensus or anything that pointed to any one candidate. And ultimately, it's the mayor's decision of what happens. While they were trying to figure out how they were going to proceed, and I was able to participate in both the preliminary and the second round of interviews, I offered to stay instead of retiring at the end of October while we could figure this out. And so I'm going to be staying for a while longer. And so what happened is the best candidate was my second in command, Jake Oppennorth. I think people felt that he was the better of the 3 candidates. And I think the thing that didn't push him to the top, obviously, was just there was a feeling he needed a little bit more time in his position to prepare for a chief's position. So what I'll be doing is when I stay in, along with my other assignments, I'm going to work with him more closely and mentor him a little bit more closely and intentionally, and prepare him for the chief's position. So that's the plan at the moment. Our first Citizen Academy class will be starting this Thursday, and that goes every Thursday through December 9th, except for one holiday. That's all I have.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions or comments?
How many people are in the academy?
We have 13.
Wow. It's impressive.
I would say, too, that a lot of the people that we invited are people with already really, really full schedules. And so I'm happy that we got 13 out of the invites that we sent out, because I know if I got an invitation like that and committed to Thursday night in December, that would be a big commitment. So I think we did well getting the 13 that we did.
We did, yes. It was quite the time commitment, so it's 6:30 to 9 every Thursday except for one Wednesday, and then also includes a Saturday and either a Friday night or Saturday morning tour of Whitcomb. So it's quite the time commitment. So for 13 out of all the ones that we invited, it's a good number.
And I'll also say thank you to those of you that participated in any part of the accelerated trial. I think it was extremely helpful to all the presenters to get, including me, to get all of our presentations together and figure out what we needed to change and get some constructive feedback. So thanks.
For the chief search process, was the intent then to go through another search and a new application process in a year? Or is it kind of, we have a timeline and plan in place now?
I think the plan is to not do another search. We don't necessarily have a strict timeline. We're kind of looking at a year-ish.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're the first person to mention that at least there's a mentoring and an individual kind of selected internally that's going to be worked into the position. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think there's times where it's really beneficial to have someone come in from the outside. And then there's times where it's really beneficial to move your internal people up. And so in my mind, if you have applicants that are internal and are capable and would do a good job, that's always my preference, because I think it's just good throughout the whole organization. Because that then creates also additional opportunities down the line as well.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing them here, probably.
Yeah, and I'm going to get Commander Opgenorth more involved in the things that I typically do as well, so you will be seeing more of them.
Any other comments or questions? All right, moving forward. Constituencies poll. How about anybody in the room would like to share about their constituencies?
So one of the things that was discussed is there's kind of a movement in policing, particularly community-oriented policing, and building what are equity goals with an agency. I know the Pullman Police Department does not have any yet. I mean, they have the mission, vision, and values, but really establishing some equity goals might be a practice for us to consider. Alongside them as establishing what these goals are, what the metrics would be, but equity goals, establishing equity goals, publishing equity goals, you're starting to see it as a more common practice to build a more inclusive, police-community relationship. So that from a multicultural diversity perspective, that would be an item I would bring to our attention.
Great. Krista, do you have anything? Rocky? Lisa, would you like to share anything? Barbara?
With the Sound of Music, but it's nice to have our population back.
Yes, the Sound of Music has been just ringing in our ears. Such lovely sounds.
Nothing to report from at large?
I was asked to mention whether or not the right information is being shared about bats. And whether, I don't know if that came directly to the police or not.
About what?
Bats, and if you have a bat in your backyard, and I guess the call came in, what if animal control or code enforcement can come help do something with the bat? And they were told not to worry about it, but I guess rabies is the concern. And so they should not be told to just ignore it, but if the bat is found, there is actually a place to take bats if you find a bat in your yard or something. And you do want to get it tested for rabies.
Do you have any information about the specifics of that particular call by any chance?
I don't have specific, it was
Okay.
on Pioneer Hill. Other than
Okay.
that, I don't have much more.
I will look into that.
I think they mentioned it was code enforcement, but they were kind of gray on that. I think they were talking, I don't know if it was an official call. I think their neighbor is the code enforcement person. And so they were talking to their neighbor.
Okay, I'll see what I can find out.
Well, yeah, bats can live, I mean, bats live everywhere, right? And often in around houses and stuff, but it was found during the day and acting weird. And so then you don't really want it to, then it's a rabies suspect. And if you're ever curious, you should kill it with a shovel and then put it in a bag and don't touch it. Otherwise, you'll probably have to get the rabies vaccine. I've only had to do it twice now, personally.
Thank you for that wonderful information, Adam. Just a disclosure, any wildlife, please just don't touch it. So nothing from me, Angie?
Yeah, so you probably noticed our students are back. They're very excited to be back. As with everyone, our COVID protocols can change at the drop of a hat. So please look at that FAQ page on WSU's main website. That's where all the real information lives, not the hearsay that goes around. And again, just a reminder that higher education is at a different standard than what you probably hear just like on the regular news. So what's happening in Walmart isn't what's happening at WSU. We do have a mask mandate for inside, and our students seem to be following that actually pretty well. I mean, Todd Hall, where Stephanie and I work, is probably the busiest building on campus aside from the Cub. And I see students, I would say 99.9% of the time, wearing their masks, so it's really good. And we now do have a vaccine mandate for WSU football games or a negative COVID test within 72 hours. And you must wear a mask now well in Martin Stadium. So that was kind of one of our newest changes. So far everything seems to be good. Everybody's happy to be back. We're just kind of monitoring the situation as we go.
I just wondered, Chief, if you had a chance to think about our conversation from the last meeting about the memorial stickers on the cars, and just wanted to take any information or thoughts back to constituents about that.
I've given it a lot of thought. I've talked to my staff about it. I've actually heard from some other community members. So I'm still considering how to deal with that. Right now, I'm not doing anything. They're still on the cars. But I think between the conversation we had here and some other conversations that I've been involved in, I'm still thinking about what to do.
Thank you.
And Angie reminded me of one thing as well to tell you is typically at WSU football games, the security is provided mostly by a private security company, and then WSU police officers are there most of the time with the help of Whitman County Sheriff's deputies, and the university athletics pays those deputies to assist. And then Apple Cup or any other reason to have more law enforcement there, a lot of times they'll call Spokane officers to come down and assist as well. Typically, our officers don't assist at the game because we have full staffing on when the game's over, or about halftime on, because we have a lot of activity on College Hill on game day weekends. This year, WSU approached us again and asked if we would be able to help, and talking with our staff and looking at scheduling. We are offering to have officers work that volunteer to work it as long as we have all of our minimum staffing requirements met. So if you're at the football games, you may see some of our officers working alongside with the WSU police officer. We've gotten some really good feedback so far from the public of just having our officers out there at the games with the fans and the students. And so I think it's going to be really beneficial to have them out there. That's it.
I've heard a lot of great feedback for having the Pullman officers there. People seem to like it a lot. All right, any public comment at this time for our one and only public person? All right, so our next meeting is October 11th at 5:30 in this room. Please attend, that would be lovely. And we are adjourned. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.